Hey guys, King of Charmanders here. Today I'll be your judge, your jury, and your mental health therapist. Today's video is about Jujutsu Kaisen. But this video has spoilers, so if you haven't read the manga or watched the anime's hidden inventory arc, you might want to skip this video. You have been warned. As a practicing mental health therapist, I can ethically and professionally diagnose mental health disorders. This video explores Satoru Gojo's trauma and whether or not he qualifies for a post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, diagnosis. This is possible as a result of Riko Amanai's death. For this video, I will be using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, or DSM-5 for short. This is what all psychotherapists use for diagnosing mental disorders. The diagnostic features of PTSD is as follows. The essential feature of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is the development of characteristic symptoms following exposure to one or more traumatic events. Emotional reactions to the traumatic event, e.g. fear, helplessness, horror, are no longer part of Criterion A. The clinical presentation of PTSD varies. In some individuals, fear-based re-experiencing emotional and behavioral symptoms may predominate. In others, anhedonic or dysphoric mood states and negative cognitions may be most distressing. In some other individuals, arousal and reactive externalizing symptoms are prominent, while in others, dissociative symptoms predominate. Finally, some individuals experience combinations of these symptoms patterns. Now, what does anhedonic mean is basically lack of pleasure in activities, and dysphoric is being unhappy, uneasy, any of that mood. That what is the definition of dysphoric.
Riko?
Here's the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder 309.81 F43.10. As you see for Criterion A, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. In this case, Gojo meets A3, learning that the traumatic events occurred to a close family member or close friend. In cases of actual or threatened death of a family member or friend, the events must have been violent or accidental. In this case, Riko meets the criteria as a close friend. Whenever Gojo found her body, you can clearly see the bullet wound exit her head. So, her death meets the criteria for violent. I mean, she literally got headshotted. As mentioned before, the manga or anime was never really clear on how Gojo found Riko's body. But based on how this scene is portrayed, it's clear that finding Riko's body had a traumatic effect on Gojo.
Gojo sensei. お、起きた。ちょっとその椅子高いやつでしょ。呼びつけといて居眠りしないでくださいよ。何笑ってんすか。別に。
Now we move on to Criterion B. Presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic events occurred. Gojo meets this criteria by Criterion B2. Recurrent distressing dreams in which the content and or affect of the dream are related to the traumatic events. Gojo puts on a good poker face here, because if you look at his eyes, there is some redness, which indicates he may have cried in his sleep, or is sleep deprived, which is why he is taking a nap when Ryuji and the crew show up to wake him up. His dream was also about his past during the hidden inventory arc, so it's likely that Gojo has had reoccurring distressing dreams since Riko Amanai's death.
勝因の省略は完璧。赤と青。それぞれの複数同時発動もぼちぼち。あとの課題は領域と長距離の瞬間移動。バトルは最強になった。すぐれ、ちょっと痩せた。大丈夫か？任務もすべて一人でこなす。
Now we move on to Criterion C. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by one or both of the following. Gojo meets this by Criterion C1. Avoidance of or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic events. After the events of the hidden inventory arc, Gojo pours everything he has into getting stronger and becomes the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, handling all of his missions alone. By occupying his time getting stronger, Gojo shows efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about Riko Amanai's death. It's also very likely that he rarely talked to Geto or his friends during this time, as he comments on Geto's weight loss, suggesting that he hasn't seen him for a period of time. Gojo also meets Criterion C2, avoidance of our efforts to avoid external reminders, people's, places, conversations, activities, objects, situations that arouse distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic events. When Gojo wakes up from his dream, he tells Megumi nothing when he wakes up smiling. This could just be regarding Megumi's child when he's talking about his father Tojo, which just happens to be the man that killed Riko Amanai. Regardless, it shows that he hasn't told Yuji or any of his students about what happened, and he prefers to keep it to himself. The fact that he just had a dream, well, it's clear signs that Gojo very likely is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
俺がしくった。お前は悪くない。すぐる、こいつら殺すか？今の俺なら多分何も感じない。
Now we move forward to Criterion D, negative alterations in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by 2 or more of the following. In this case, Gojo meets D3 and D4, persistent distorted cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events that led the individual to blame himself, herself, or others. And number 4, persistent negative emotional state, e.g. fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. For D3, it's clear that Gojo blames himself for Riko's death. Although Tojo was the one who killed Riko, it sounds like Gojo feels it's his fault because of his failure to defeat Tojo in their first battle is what led to Riko's assassination. Gojo also meets D4 with his desire to kill the followers of the Star religious group despite the fact they had nothing to do with Riko's death. Gojo must feel a persistent amount of anger towards the group for taking the life of someone dear to him.
それはまだ難しいかな。これなら最小限のリソースで無加減呪術をほぼ出しっぱにできる。
出しっぱなんて脳が焼き切れるよ。
自己補完の範疇で反転術式も回し続ける。いつでも新鮮な脳を。
Next is Criterion E, marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic events beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by 2 or more of the following. This one isn't super clear, but Gojo does meet criteria E2 and E3, reckless or self-destructive behavior, and hypervigilance. For E2, you can see Shoko's concern with Gojo's recklessness with his methods of developing his limitless technique. Even though he's able to heal using his reverse curse technique, it's still a very reckless approach. This leads to E3. Gojo's hypervigilance with assessing and creating countermeasures for every threat allows him to meet this criteria. It's like he is doing this to ensure that history never repeats itself and he never loses anyone he cares about ever again.
強くなってよ。僕に置いていかれないくらい。
Last but not least, we have the file Criterion E, F, and G. E, the duration of the disturbance is more than 1 month. F, the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in relationships with parents, siblings, peers, or other caregivers, or with school behavior. And G, the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance, for example, medication or alcohol, or another medical condition. Gojo meets E as the distressing dream he has takes place more than 10 years after the hidden inventory arc. However, there are limited signs that Gojo meets F. Prior to Riko's death, Gojo was around Shoko and Geto for long periods of time. However, after Riko's assassination, Gojo is obsessed with getting stronger and is rarely seen around Shoko and Geto. This might be due to his missions, but this can classify as significant impairment in regards to relationships with his peers. And Gojo meets G, of course, because the disturbance is not due to medication, alcohol, or another medical condition.
俺だけ強くてもダメらしいよ。俺が救えるのは他人に救われる準備があるやつだけだ。
And lastly, specifications. With dissociative symptoms, which is basically being detached from the world, and with delay expression, which is if the PTSD symptoms aren't met until at least 6 months after the event. This means you can go years before PTSD hits you like a truck. Gojo doesn't have either of these, so we just say without for both specifiers. And with that, Satoru Gojo's diagnosis would be Posttraumatic Stress Disorder 309.81F43.10 without dissociative symptoms and without delayed expression. I hope in the future Jujutsu Kaisen explores more of Gojo's trauma, but the series does a great job of portraying his struggle to cope with his failure to not only save Riko Amanai, but his fallout when Satoru Gojo falls to the dark side. His trauma is fierce, and it's even further enforced by his quote, "The only ones I can save are those who are already ready to be saved by another," is one of the most powerful quotes of the series. This quote shows just how human Gojo is despite being the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer.
マジでなんすか恥ずかしいんでやめてもらえます説明
As of today, PTSD has no cure, and the world of Jujutsu Kaisen hasn't shown a cure for mental health disorders so far, even if it's severe trauma like post-traumatic stress disorder. Thankfully, it looks like Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi give Gojo a reason to keep going, and he is able to live a life where he can protect and teach his students, as well as be one of the most annoying and embarrassing senseis in the entire world. If you liked this video, please do me a huge favor, like, subscribe, and comment if there's an anime character you would like me to psychoanalyze. Take care of yourselves, drink plenty of water, and I will see y'all on the next video.